In 1995, a bank robber named MacArthur Wheeler was arrested after robbing 2 banks in Pittsburgh. Wheeler was reportedly shocked by his arrest. During questioning, he wondered how the police had been able to identify his face from the security camera footage. When carrying out the robberies, Wheeler didn't wear a mask. Instead, he covered his face with lemon juice. He believed that lemon juice contained properties that would make his face invisible to cameras. He had learned that lemon juice could be used as invisible ink for writing on paper. Because of this, he thought his plan was perfectly logical and was convinced that the cameras wouldn't be able to capture his face. As a result, he believed the police would never be able to find him. Intrigued by the case, David Dunning and Justin Kruger later conducted a study. They wanted to understand why people with limited knowledge or ability often fail to recognize the extent of their own limitations. In 1999, they published a study titled Unskilled and Unaware of It. In the study, they tested a group of participants on grammar, humor, and logical reasoning. In the first experiment, 65 participants were asked to evaluate which jokes they found funny. The results were surprising. Those who believed they were the best at judging humor actually performed the worst on the test. Dunning and Kruger then gave the same participants language and logic tests. The pattern remained the same. Many of the participants with the lowest scores were also the most confident in their abilities. Meanwhile, those with the highest scores tended to assume that other people could probably perform the tasks just as well, or even better, than they could. From these findings came what we now call the Dunning-Kruger Effect. But before we talk about the psychology behind it, think about the people you've met throughout your life. The coworker who always has an answer, the friend who thinks they're an expert on every topic, the stranger online who speaks with absolute certainty. They never hesitate, never doubt themselves, never stop to consider that they might be wrong. And that's exactly what makes them so convincing. Because confidence feels like competence, even when it isn't. The strange part is that these people often don't realize they're mistaken. And if the people around them know even less than they do, their confidence becomes even more persuasive. There's an old saying, the loudest person in the room is not always the smartest. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias in which people with limited knowledge or skill develop an illusory sense of superiority. In other words, they greatly overestimate their own abilities. People who know only a little about a subject tend to overestimate how much they know, while underestimating how much others know. As a result, the people who are most confident in their abilities are often not the most competent. Dunning and Kruger illustrated this phenomenon with a graph. The vertical axis represents confidence, while the horizontal axis represents competence. The graph shows that when we first learn a little about something, our confidence tends to skyrocket. But as our knowledge grows, we begin to realize how much we still don't know. At this stage, our confidence often drops dramatically. As we gain more experience and develop a deeper understanding, confidence gradually rises again, but this time, it's grounded in reality. Interestingly, human beings are generally not very good at evaluating their own abilities. This has been observed across many areas, including logical reasoning, financial literacy, mathematics, emotional intelligence, and even chess. Many people tend to judge their abilities as if they were experts. So the question is, why does this happen? The people who scored poorly in those studies should have known they didn't fully understand the material, right? After all, we usually have a sense when we've done badly on a test. We're the ones answering the questions, not someone else. So why does this phenomenon occur so often when someone has only a limited understanding of a subject? And why is it that the less someone knows, the more likely they are to believe they know a lot?
It's called like the knowledge circle. The smaller your circle of knowledge is, the smaller the border is with all the things that you don't know. And so when our knowledge is very small, we think like, oh, well, you know, there's like 2 or 3 things that I don't understand, but you know, I get the basics. But as you learn more and that knowledge circle expands, the border of that circle with the unknown expands as well. And so once you become an expert in your field, you realize that there are like 250 things that you don't understand, and tons of open questions, and tons of inconsistencies, and tons of shit that people have gotten wrong. And so you get this paradoxical effect where the more you know about a subject, the more you struggle to talk about it because you realize all the things you don't know.
When we begin learning something, we often overestimate how much we actually know. We feel like we already understand the subject. In reality, however, we haven't learned enough to realize just how much we still don't know. We're not yet skilled enough to accurately evaluate our own knowledge and abilities. We can't see the subject in its full depth. As a result, we end up believing we know far more than we actually do. Imagine you're about to take an exam on World War II. Because you've watched plenty of TikTok videos about the topic, you assume you have a solid understanding of it. But aside from those videos, you haven't read any books, done any serious research, or, of course, experienced the events firsthand. When taking the test, because you don't feel completely clueless, you start to think you'll probably do pretty well. At the very least, you assume you'll perform better than the average student. That's how the Dunning-Kruger Effect works. Watching TikTok videos, or even a few documentaries about World War II doesn't mean you've developed a deep understanding of the subject. You've only scratched the surface. It's like an iceberg. We see only the small portion above the water while remaining unaware of the massive structure hidden beneath the surface. And that's what creates the illusion that we already know everything. We see this phenomenon every day, from the know-it-all friend to the student who believes they're smart despite poor grades, to the employee who gets frustrated when someone else receives a promotion. Performance reviews often provide a relatively objective picture of a person's abilities, yet when someone doesn't fully understand their own job, they're often dissatisfied with those evaluations. In their mind, they're far more competent than the report suggests. As a result, they come up with all kinds of justifications. Maybe the boss doesn't like them. Maybe the person who got promoted wasn't really better. What they fail to consider is the possibility that they still have a lot to learn. This pattern appears almost everywhere. One study asked engineers to compare their abilities with those of their co-workers. A surprisingly large number believed they belonged among the very best performers in the company. Drivers often do the same. In America, around 93% of people believe they're better than average drivers, which is mathematically impossible. The strange thing is that we're usually much better at spotting overconfidence in other people than in ourselves. We can immediately recognize when someone else is talking nonsense, but when our own knowledge is limited, we often fail to notice the gaps in our understanding. And that's what makes this bias so dangerous. The less we know, the harder it becomes to recognize how little we know. Dunning and Kruger's research found that the less someone knows about a subject, the weaker their metacognitive ability tends to be within that domain. Metacognition is the awareness of our own thinking processes. Simply put, it's the brain's ability to evaluate itself. When metacognitive ability is low, people fail to recognize their own limitations and incompetence. And this is where the greatest irony of the Dunning-Kruger effect lies. Quite often, the people who talk the most are the ones who understand the topic the least. But because they speak with such confidence, they're often the ones people trust the most. What's even more unfortunate is that the people who understand the least are often the least likely to learn. They don't feel the need to read more, listen to different perspectives, or consider the possibility that they might be wrong. In their minds, they already know enough. Meanwhile, those who genuinely understand a field often doubt themselves. They're constantly aware of how much they still don't know, and sometimes they even feel unqualified to teach others. As a result, they tend to stay quiet. In the end, Public discourse is often dominated by the loudest voices, not the most competent ones. We see this every day across the media and the internet. Fake gurus, influencers posing as experts, self-proclaimed specialists, and countless others who possess only a shallow understanding of a topic, yet speak with extraordinary confidence. They may know only a tiny fraction of the subject, but that never stops them from sharing their opinions. Once again, as the old saying goes, empty vessels make the most noise. Now, misinformation has become a major problem. People learn a little about a topic and then immediately start teaching it to others. They don't take the time to dig deeper before shouting about how much they know, or more accurately, how much they think they know. Too often, we get our information from the loudest voices, not from the wisest ones. If the loudest people are often the least informed, then why are those who truly know so often silent? Once again, the answer lies in the Dunning-Kruger Effect. When the 65 participants in Dunning-Kruger's study were given 3 different tests, those who scored the highest generally recognized that they had performed well. However, they also tended to believe that other people could probably do even better than they could. They overestimated the abilities of others while underestimating their own. As a result, the people who are filled with doubt are often the ones with the greatest knowledge. Smart people frequently fail to realize just how capable they are. Their awareness of the vast amount they still don't know makes them more cautious about speaking with certainty. It's easy to assume that you're not particularly special because the things that come naturally to you seem easy for everyone else as well. But in many ways, that's actually a reasonable mindset. People who recognize their own shortcomings tend to keep learning. They don't stop at what they already know, unlike those who are too quick to believe they have everything figured out. That said, the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't entirely negative. In fact, this bias may be one of the reasons many of us have the courage to take the first step. When I first started making YouTube videos, I created content about topics I didn't fully understand. Looking back now, there are countless things I would change. Some of my conclusions were far too confident, even though my knowledge at the time was still very limited. I also had no idea how difficult it was to be a YouTube creator. I didn't understand the long process behind making a video, from finding ideas and conducting research to writing scripts, recording voiceovers, editing footage, and dealing with YouTube's algorithm, which can sometimes be mentally exhausting. Back then, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I only knew one thing. I wanted to make videos. Looking back now, I can see how little I actually knew. I didn't understand storytelling. I didn't understand audience retention. I didn't understand how much research goes into a single video. And I definitely didn't understand how difficult it would be to keep going when nobody was watching. But maybe that's exactly why I started. Had I known every obstacle waiting ahead, I might have convinced myself not to try at all, so I uploaded the first video anyway. In that sense, this cognitive bias can actually help us take the first step without being overwhelmed by everything we don't yet know. And that single decision changed the course of my life. People often say that the first step is the hardest, but sometimes we're able to take that step with confidence, precisely because we're unaware of all the challenges waiting ahead. Once that first step is taken, however, the next choice is ours. We can choose to stay comfortable with the little knowledge we have, or we can acknowledge that our understanding is still shallow and continue learning. We have to challenge these cognitive biases and recognize that what we know may be nothing more than a scratch on the surface. The road ahead is still long. If you ever find yourself feeling completely certain about something, take a moment to question it. Seek different perspectives, read a little more, challenge your own conclusions, because there may be information out there that completely changes the way you see the world. The most dangerous person is not the one who knows nothing. It's the one who knows a little and mistakes that little knowledge for wisdom. So keep learning, keep questioning yourself, keep challenging your own beliefs, because the moment you become completely certain that you're right, may be the moment you stop growing. And growth begins where certainty ends. Thank you